There's a moment when she realizes what she lost. But by then, it's already too late. Not because he became someone else, but because he became someone without her. She thought she had time. She thought love would wait. She thought loyalty was a leash. Now she watches him become everything she ignored. And that pain, no post, no rebound, no story can mask it. Before we begin, comment, "I'm untouchable." Now listen closely. Number 1, she thought you'd always stay. She gets comfortable because you made things too easy, not by spoiling her with gifts or begging for validation, but because your consistency became invisible to her, your loyalty became background noise, and your love, though deep and patient, became the air she assumed would never run out. She saw the way you made sacrifices not as strength, but as predictability. And that's where the damage began, because when a man gives endlessly without demanding recognition, it teaches the wrong person that this is the standard and that your emotional effort isn't rare. And so she starts to believe that the way you remember her every little preference, the way you take time to learn her unspoken moods, the way you show up in small moments with reliability and care, those aren't things to value. They're just things to expect. And slowly, what should be appreciated becomes taken for granted. She stops saying thank you. She stops checking in. She stops nurturing what she once prayed for. And she starts testing how far she can push without losing you. Not maliciously at first, but with a blind confidence that no matter how she acts, no matter how selfish she becomes, no matter how cold or distant she turns, you'll still be there. Why? Because you always were. She sees you apologize first. She sees you de-escalate fights. She sees you absorb blame just to keep the peace. And instead of respecting that, she misreads it as emotional softness, weakness even. She interprets your non-reaction to her provocations not as strength, but as fear of losing her. And so the testing continues. The late replies, the emotional shutdowns, the passive-aggressive behavior, the lack of intimacy. And still you remain because your loyalty isn't a performance. It's a core value. But that's the tragic twist, because the more you give, the more she disconnects. Not because she doesn't care, but because she confuses your calm for complacency. And she doesn't understand that silence in a man is often the final warning, that when you stop explaining how you feel, it's not because you're bottling it up. It's because you've accepted the truth and chosen peace over performance. And she doesn't see it coming, because you don't announce your exit like those men she dated who needed drama to feel power. You leave quietly, respectfully, but fully. And when that day comes, when you finally stop calling, stop checking in, stop initiating, she panics not because she misses you as much as she misses control. The control over someone who genuinely loved her without games, without manipulation, without conditions. And suddenly, her world feels unstable. Not because you were the loudest or the most dominant, but because you were the foundation she thought would never crumble. And now that it has, she realizes that the silence she once resented was actually peace, that the patience she once mocked was emotional strength, that the presence she once ignored was the most authentic love she ever had. And now, in your absence, every new interaction feels hollow, transactional, unfamiliar. She can't explain it to her friends because it doesn't make sense to them, because all they saw was a calm man who didn't fight back, who wasn't flashy or dramatic. But what they missed, what she missed, was that you weren't competing with other men for her attention. You were competing with her idea of what a man should be. And in the end, she chose chaos over character, unpredictability over peace, validation over value. And now, she sits alone with screenshots she doesn't have the courage to delete, and memories she thought she'd never miss. And while she's replaying old conversations, trying to read between the lines for where she lost you, you're not looking back because you've realized something most never do, that your peace, your direction, Your standards are not just yours to protect. They are sacred, and once you rise to the level of emotional self-respect that refuses to be negotiated, you don't lower yourself for comfort. You don't shrink to fit into someone else's expectations. You expand, evolve, detach. And by the time she realizes she never really understood what kind of man she had, you're already long gone, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because you've reconnected with the version of you that loves himself enough to walk away from someone who saw your devotion as default instead of a decision. And once you've stepped into that realization that you were never supposed to cross back over, comes the question every man eventually faces alone. What now? What do you do when your patience is gone, when your identity is scattered from years of bending too far, when you know you can't go back, but you're unsure how to go forward? That's exactly why the Stoic relationship blueprint exists. An unfiltered guide filled with timeless principles that will transform how you see yourself, how you handle love, loss, and loyalty, and most importantly, how you rebuild as a man who can no longer be broken the same way. And now, it's available in audiobook format, which means you can absorb every truth, every mindset shift, while taking a walk, driving, training, whenever you need it. This isn't just a book. It's a blueprint for self-respect, a compass for rebuilding everything you were taught to suppress. Once you own it, it's yours forever. No expiration, no subscription, just powerful insight you can return to every time life tests your peace. The link's in the comments. Get it now, keep it for life, and never question your worth again. Number 2. Silence hits harder than words. When you stop chasing, it shakes her in ways no argument, no confession, no dramatic goodbye ever could, because she's not used to being left without a fight. She's used to tears, to emotional outbursts, to people begging to stay. But when you go quiet, not out of spite, but out of resolve, it introduces her to a level of discomfort she can't post her way out of. It's the moment she realizes that the man who once showed up for every emotional emergency now shows up only for himself. And that absence creates a vacuum that no rebound can fill, because it's not just about you not texting her. It's about the void your consistency used to occupy. And suddenly she's forced to face herself without the emotional cushion you once provided. And that's what really stings. Not your absence alone, but the withdrawal of your energy, your insight, your emotional intelligence that she mistook for oversensitivity. And now, as she scrolls through conversations hoping for signs that you might still care, she finds only timestamps and unfinished threads, and the silence becomes a canvas where all her actions echo back louder than they ever did before. The indifference she once weaponized against you now becomes the exact poison she drinks daily. And every time you don't respond, don't watch her stories, don't like her posts, don't check in, it's not just silence, it's consequence. And she begins to understand that she didn't just lose a partner, she lost the one person who never required her to perform, the one who made space for her raw, unfiltered self. And your silence becomes a daily reminder that not every man will wait forever. That love unreciprocated does not remain available just because it was once unconditional. And while she sits in that confusion, wondering how someone could just stop showing up without warning, you're out there rebuilding. Not with anger, but with intention, practicing control over your impulses, reflecting, recalibrating, developing the kind of internal foundation that no relationship can shake again, because now you understand that the cost of explaining your worth to someone who refuses to see it is paid in emotional depletion, and you're done paying interest on a debt they never intended to settle. And she feels this deeply in the moments where she imagines your voice responding but hears nothing, in the moments where her confidence falters and she wishes someone would remind her she's worth it. But it's not your job anymore, and she knows this, and it burns, not because you're being cruel, but because she remembers when your words built her up, when your voice calmed her storms, and now that voice is no longer available on demand. And that's what changes everything, because she thought time would heal the distance, that you'd return after your phase, that her absence would somehow pull you back in. But all it did was give you space to see the situation for what it really was, a test of your self-respect. And this time, you passed, not by reacting, not by retaliating, but by retreating, not as weakness but as wisdom. And while the world teaches men to chase, to fix, to prove, you've learned to step back, to observe, to protect your peace without explanation. And she can't understand it because she never thought you'd be the one to choose silence over salvation. But what she failed to grasp is that your quiet isn't absence. It's evolution. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And she doesn't have access to this new version of you, not because you're being petty, but because growth requires you to leave behind what no longer honors you. And that's what your silence really says. I'm no longer trying to be heard where I was never truly seen. Number 3, she starts looking back. She scrolls through your old messages like they're pages from a book she never read when it mattered. Only now does she realize the meaning behind every paragraph you once wrote. The subtle ways you said, "I'm here," without screaming it. The times you stayed up just to calm her mind. The weekends you sacrificed your own comfort just to make sure she felt loved. But she didn't see it then because she was so fixated on what you weren't, on what social media told her a man should be. And now, stripped of your energy, your presence, your support, she replays your voice in her mind, not because she misses noise, but because it carried depth, clarity, stability, and what once felt boring or too available now feels like everything she can't find in anyone else. And it's only now, in her silence, in her search for a man who sees her again, that she realizes what you were was rare. Not flashy or loud or instantly addictive, but rare in the kind of way only felt after it's gone. And as she looks back on the things you did, remembering her smallest preferences, the way you adjusted your habits for her convenience, how you handled conflict without losing respect, she begins to understand you didn't love her for who she pretended to be, but for the parts of her no one else noticed or cared to hold space for. And now, those little things you did are not just missed, they're haunting, because every new connection lacks that emotional intelligence, that depth, that genuine interest that came so naturally to you, and she finds herself comparing every man to you, not because she wants to, but because her soul does it automatically, because your energy lingers, and it's not just the good memories that stick, it's the guilt, the realization that while you were building something real, she was distracted by fantasies, validation, drama, and now she's living in the consequences of that choice, trying to find a way back to a door that no longer opens. And this is where most people break, because they realize too late that you don't get to treat loyalty like an option and expect it to wait forever. And as she reflects, she doesn't just remember you, she reevaluates herself, starts to see how often she deflected, how many times she chose pride over connection, how many moments she shut you down when all you were trying to do was build something that could weather the real challenges of life. And now that you're gone, truly gone, not just physically but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, there's nothing left to manipulate, no strings to pull, no hooks to hang her regret on, and that void becomes her reality. A space that forces her to confront everything she thought she knew about relationships, about men, about herself. And while she's stuck in that cycle of regret, you've already transformed, not by accident, but because the pain of staying where you weren't valued taught you how to rewire your standards, how to invest in your own growth, how to shift your focus from saving others to elevating yourself. And every part of her that once leaned on your emotional labor now has to carry its own weight, which she never learned to do, because she always assumed the man would bend, would fix, would forgive. But now she learns that not every man sticks around just because he loves deeply. Some walk away because they finally learned how to love wisely. And now as she scrolls, rewinds, remembers, she starts to grasp that you were never the one who needed to be better. She was. And the worst part is she realizes it after it matters, after you've become someone she no longer has access to, someone whose time, energy, and loyalty are no longer for rent to people who pay with inconsistency, because now you know your worth isn't proven through sacrifice, but through standards, and no amount of reminiscing on her part can bring back the version of you who accepted less just to make her feel like more. Number 4. But you're not the same anymore. By the time she finally reaches out, when she feels your absence more than her own reflection, she expects to pick up where things left off. But what she doesn't realize is that the man she's trying to reconnect with doesn't exist anymore, because you didn't spend that time away sitting in bitterness or plotting revenge. You spent it rebuilding piece by piece the version of you that she tried to shrink. You've redefined yourself not around her approval, but around your own principles, your purpose, your direction. And while she's looking for the man who once overextended himself to accommodate her chaos, who bent his standards in the name of love, who gave endlessly with no return, she's confronted by someone she no longer understands, not because you've become colder, but because you've become clearer, not because you hate her, but because you've learned how to love yourself first. And that change is what breaks her, because for the first time, she realizes she no longer has influence over your emotions, your time, your energy. And this is where the shift becomes permanent, because now you don't reply instantly, not out of strategy, but because her urgency no longer governs your attention. You don't ask questions to check on her, not because you're detached, but because your curiosity is now reserved for things that serve your growth. And while she tries to re-enter your life with small talk, nostalgia, and thinly veiled emotional hooks, she finds nothing to grip onto, because you've removed the handles, the access points, the back doors that once allowed her to walk in and out as she pleased. And now you're not performing anymore. You're not managing her emotions. You're not chasing closure. You're living with clarity, discipline, and direction. And what really tears her apart is the realization that you're not trying to hurt her. You're just done hurting yourself to make her feel safe. And that energy shift becomes unbearable, because now she's talking to a man who doesn't ask for validation, who doesn't seek emotional breadcrumbs, who doesn't flinch when met with passive aggression or emotional manipulation. And this stability is what makes her panic, not because you're being cruel, but because she's no longer your emotional center. And she sees it in your eyes, in your pace, in the way you respond with detachment where you once poured empathy. And while she's trying to reinitiate the old dynamic, she realizes it's gone, dead, burned away in the fires of your transformation. And she finally understands that this isn't a phase. This isn't temporary. It's a new way of being, a new standard, a new threshold that she no longer meets. And she hates it not because you're better off, but because she no longer gets to be part of the version of you that knows exactly who he is, exactly what he wants, and exactly what he'll never tolerate again. And that truth breaks her more than any argument, more than any rejection, because the hardest thing to accept is that the person who used to orbit around you now has his own gravitational pull. And while she scrambles for a way back in, hoping that a soft apology, a nostalgic memory, or a last-ditch effort might reopen the door, she's met with a wall. Not a wall built from resentment, but one built from boundaries. And that's what she never accounted for. A man who no longer needs her validation to feel complete. A man who no longer believes that love should cost him his peace, his focus, or his sense of self. And as she stands outside that wall, she finally realizes that she's not looking at a man who's punishing her. She's looking at a man who finally knows the price of being misunderstood and refuses to pay it ever again. Number 5. She breaks in quiet ways. She doesn't announce the pain, doesn't post cryptic captions about loss, doesn't call you crying, but you need to understand what's happening behind the silence, because while she might look calm to the outside world, she is unraveling in the quiet places she once ran to escape herself. And now that you are no longer her emotional landing strip, she's forced to confront her own emptiness. And what's most jarring to her is that the collapse isn't loud, it's subtle. It's in the way she checks her phone 10 times a day hoping for your name to appear. In the way she takes 2 hours to get ready just to walk past places she knows you used to go, hoping to accidentally bump into you. It's in the way she types and deletes messages late at night because she wants to talk but doesn't know what version of you would answer, if any, because she can feel the change, she can feel the distance, and what destroys her more than missing you is realizing that she no longer has access to you, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually, and that absence becomes her punishment, not one you assigned, but one she earned, and the pain comes in waves, disguised as distractions, because no man that comes after you fills the void. They just help her forget it temporarily. But when the noise fades and the moments get quiet again, there's nothing left but the echo of your presence, and every piece of who you were, from the way you used to notice her patterns, to the way you held space for her when she was shutting down, now feels irreplaceable, and she starts to break in ways she can't even articulate. She finds herself rereading old conversations, trying to find a different interpretation that might give her hope. But the more she reads, the more she realizes that you were always consistent, always clear, and the only thing clouded was her judgment, and it hits her, not because she lost you, but because she finally sees you for who you were. And that realization breaks her piece by piece. It eats at her slowly, because regret isn't like heartbreak. It doesn't scream, it lingers. It shows up when she sees someone who looks like you, when she hears that song you once sent her, when she laughs and immediately thinks how you would have loved that moment. And this is the part she never saw coming, because she always thought she'd have time, thought you'd be there when she figured herself out, thought you'd wait while she played with options, explored her freedom, and now all those choices feel like shackles, because the freedom she traded you for turned out to be isolation in disguise. And while she's out there trying to look unbothered, inside she's constantly reliving the turning point, the moment you stopped trying, stopped asking, stopped offering parts of yourself to someone who only saw them as tools to fix her chaos. And that moment is her quiet undoing, not because she wants you back, but because she knows now that she never deserved the version of you that gave so much, without asking for anything but presence, loyalty, and respect. And she realizes that the version of herself that you loved was the mask, not the real her. And now that she sees herself fully, she can't stand her own reflection, not because of what she lost, but because of how she lost it. And that guilt becomes the heaviest part of her existence, not because you remind her of it, but because your absence no longer allows her to escape it. Number 6, your peace hurts her ego. She expected a reaction, something dramatic, something emotional, a fight for closure or a plea for attention, because that's what everyone else gave her, and that's what she was used to. But you didn't do any of that. You didn't explain your absence. You didn't throw accusations or blame. You simply walked away, calmly, quietly, and fully. And that act, so clean, so unbothered, became the deepest cut she's ever experienced. Because it wasn't just the end of the relationship. It was the end of her ability to control the narrative. And now, your peace, the thing she once considered boring, is the very thing that torments her, because she sees it in your eyes, in the way you move, in the way you post without intention to attract, in the way you laugh with depth instead of performance, and nothing makes her feel more irrelevant than knowing that your world got better after she left it. Not because you replaced her with someone else, but because you replaced her chaos with clarity. And while she thought you'd be broken, licking your wounds, trying to prove a point, you were actually building, creating, reading, training, evolving into the version of yourself she never believed in. And that evolution wasn't fueled by revenge, it was sparked by revelation. The understanding that being available to someone who undervalues you is the fastest way to become a stranger to yourself. And now your growth is not just visible, it's undeniable. It shows in your posture, in your pace, in the way you don't rush conversations or seek validation. And that shift, that spiritual detachment, it burns her ego because she no longer holds emotional currency in your life. And the more she sees you thrive, the more she realizes that she didn't just lose you. She lost the last version of herself that felt powerful, because her identity was tied to how you chased her, how you showed up despite her inconsistencies, how you gave even when she didn't deserve it. And now that you're giving that energy to yourself, she feels bankrupt. Not because you took something from her, but because she never learned how to generate her own worth without being the center of someone else's affection. And while she tries to downplay your transformation in conversations with her friends, the truth slips through in the way her tone shifts when your name comes up, in the way her smile fades when someone mentions you, because deep down she knows the truth. Your peace exposed her instability, your calm revealed her chaos, your growth highlighted her stagnation. And now, you're not just a memory, you're a mirror she avoids because every time she looks at who you've become, she's forced to confront who she never became. And that reflection doesn't just bruise her pride, it breaks her, because she always thought she had the upper hand, always thought she could come back if she wanted to. But now, she sees clearly. And it's not the fact that you moved on that hurts her. It's the fact that you became everything she needed while she was busy trying to prove she didn't need you. Number 7. No one loves her like you did. She thought it was normal. The way you remembered her stories, the way you checked in before bed, the way you cared about her day even when yours was heavy, the way you asked about things she mentioned in passing 2 weeks ago. And now, after you, she realizes those weren't gestures. They were rare emotional investments, and no one after you does that. Not because they don't care, but because most people operate from self-interest, not from self-awareness. And she starts to notice it in the smallest ways. How new people don't pick up on her mood shifts, how they talk more than they listen, how they treat connection like convenience instead of commitment. And suddenly, all the things she rolled her eyes at when you did them now feel like luxuries, like privileges, and it messes with her mind because the love you gave was real, intentional, consistent, and she didn't know how to hold it because she never healed the parts of herself that believed love should come with struggle, that comfort was suspicious, that calmness was dull, and so she chased intensity, drama, unpredictability, and what she got in return was short-term validation and long-term emptiness. Because the truth is, no one ever made her feel seen like you did. And that feeling, that security, that depth, it becomes a benchmark she can't replicate, no matter how many dates she goes on, no matter how many distractions she finds. Because when you've been truly loved, your soul remembers, and hers does, every day. And it's not the big moments that haunt her. It's the little ones, the way you'd ask if she ate, the way you'd send something just to make her smile, the way you were present even when life was hard. And now, every new connection feels like a transaction instead of a bond. And she can't explain to others why she's still not over it, because on paper she moved on. But in reality, her heart never left, because it was only when you were gone that she realized the kind of love you gave wasn't about possession or control. It was about presence, intention, and genuine care. And now that care is gone, and she can't find it again, because what she missed wasn't just a man. It was a foundation, a safe space, a place where she could be herself without fear of rejection or performance. And now, no one offers that. because that kind of love isn't just given, it's cultivated, protected, earned, and while she searches for a replica, you've become unreproducible, not because you changed, but because she finally sees you clearly, and that clarity comes with a cost. Knowing she had the rarest kind of love and didn't realize it until it became a memory she can't escape. Number 8. She starts making excuses. She can't admit it. Not to herself, not to her friends, not even in the dead, quiet moments where her own conscience whispers the truth. Because to do that would mean owning the fact that she didn't just lose something good. She lost someone who never should have had to prove his worth in the first place. So instead of accountability, she wraps herself in narratives, stories designed to make her feel better, excuses that deflect the sting of her own decisions. She tells herself, you changed, that you became distant, too focused, too cold, too unavailable. And in doing so, she makes herself the victim of a story where she was the one abandoned instead of the one who left emotionally first. She tells others that timing was off, that you were great but not great for her, that maybe you were too into her, too eager, too serious, and she forgets to mention how many times you showed up when she went silent, how many texts you sent with no reply, how often you compromised just to avoid tension, how you gave her loyalty when she gave you uncertainty. And now that reality is setting in, now that your energy is no longer an option, she needs to rewrite the narrative, not to move on, but to preserve her pride. And pride is a dangerous thing. It'll keep someone defending a sinking ship just to say they were right. And that's exactly what she does. Until the silence you left becomes too loud to ignore. Until the people she vents to start asking the real questions. Until the new people she dates don't match the standard you effortlessly held. And that's when the cracks start to show. Not externally, but internally. Because even her own mind starts rejecting the lies. And in that moment, the excuses aren't just lies. They're shields she built out of desperation. And they begin to fail. Because no matter how many justifications she tries to lean on, there's one thing she can't hide from. Results. And the results speak louder than the stories. You're growing, healing, building, and she's stuck explaining why she let go of a man who never stopped choosing her until he had no choice but to choose himself. And that's the part that eats at her most. Not that she can't find someone else, but that the one she had is now someone who wouldn't even entertain her presence. Not out of spite, but out of evolution. And when she realizes that the same man who once dropped everything for her now guards his energy like a vault, she understands that excuses may protect her from guilt, but they won't shield her from consequences. And this is the part no one talks about. The internal collapse that happens when someone realizes they aren't allowed back into the life they took for granted. And while she tries to convince others and herself that it was mutual, that it was time, deep down, she knows you stayed longer than you should have, gave more than you received, and loved harder than she ever understood. And now that clarity becomes a constant voice, one she can't silence with logic or deflection, because you didn't leave bitter, you left better. And that truth sits in every room she walks into, whether she acknowledges it or not. Number 9. Regret becomes her shadow. It doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly, at moments she doesn't expect, when she's scrolling mindlessly and stumbles on something that reminds her of you, or when she hears a song and her body tenses before she even realizes why, or when she's with someone new, and he doesn't respond the way you used to, doesn't listen the way you did, doesn't ask follow-up questions, or catch her tone shifts, or remember the little things that made her feel like more than just a body in a room. And that's when regret hits. Not with noise, but with clarity, because she starts to feel your absence not as a loss, but as a revelation. And that revelation becomes permanent when she realizes the kind of love you gave can't be replaced, can't be bought, can't be found in places where people only know how to take. And now, Every new connection feels like an echo of a feeling she used to know. But the volume is lower, the warmth is colder, the effort is shallower, and she starts to question everything, not just about you, but about herself, because regret is never just about losing someone. It's about realizing you weren't the person they needed when they gave you their best. And now, it haunts her. The memory of who she was when you were trying your hardest, the person who rolled her eyes when you expressed your feelings, who minimized your efforts, who treated your concern as control. And now that you're not there to explain, to validate, to remind her who she was to you, she has to live with her own interpretation. And that interpretation gets darker over time, because while she used to blame you for not being perfect, she now realizes you were consistent, loyal, honest, and intentional. And those traits don't grow on trees. They come from experience, from pain, from effort. And she threw them away, not because they weren't valuable, but because she was too distracted to notice. And now that you've moved on, now that you've redirected your energy inward, that regret becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a lens through which she views her past and future. A reminder that the version of you she knew is gone. And what makes it worse is knowing that the new version of you isn't bitter or cold. It's just unavailable to her. And that emotional distance is worse than a breakup, because it's not personal, it's principled. And while she wishes she could go back, fix it, say sorry, try harder, she can't. Not because you hate her, but because she doesn't fit in the world you built without her. And that exclusion becomes the shadow that follows her, in every decision, in every potential relationship, in every moment where she wonders what could have been if she just listened a little more, fought a little harder, softened her edges instead of sharpening them. And now, she sits in that reality, not because she deserves to suffer, but because that's what happens when the consequences of our choices finally outweigh the comfort of our excuses. And regret, when earned, doesn't scream. It whispers truths so loud they echo in every silent moment. And no matter what she says or does, she knows she had the real thing, and she didn't know how to keep it. Number 10. Too late to fix what's gone. By the time she gathers the courage to reach out, to send that, "Hey, just checking on you" message, to test the waters and see if your heart still lives in the same address, it's already done. Not the relationship, but the version of you who waited, who hoped, who wanted her to come around. And now, that message she sends isn't received with anticipation or relief. It's read with calm detachment, not because you're cold, but because you finally understood the difference between what you want and what you deserve, and you no longer bend for people who treated your presence like background noise. And as she reads your short, polite replies, she realizes the distance isn't in your words. It's in your energy, in your clarity, in your refusal to re-enter a chapter that already closed. And that realization crushes her, because she thought she'd always have a window, a way back in, a part of you that still longed for her enough to respond emotionally. But now, she finds nothing to hold on to, no weak spot to exploit, no emotional crack to squeeze through. And this is what makes it real. Not that you're angry, but that you're indifferent. And indifference is the final door, the one that doesn't slam, doesn't lock, just quietly disappears. And while she scrambles to reconnect, to prove she's changed, to show you that she now understands what she lost, it's too late. Not because you don't see the change, but because you no longer care to participate in it. And this is the part that no one warns them about. When a good man finally walks away, it's not with a speech or a dramatic exit. It's with resolve, with silence, with the kind of peace that doesn't need to be defended or explained. And now that peace is your standard, and she doesn't meet it, not because she's unworthy, but because she was unwilling. And choices have consequences, even if they're delayed. And while she might find someone else, build something new, feel happy again, a part of her will always know that the one who saw her in ways no one else did, who stood by her longer than anyone should have, who forgave things most would have walked away from immediately, is gone, not because he stopped loving her, but because he started loving himself more. And that's the point. That's the lesson. That's the outcome of playing games with something sacred. And while you continue to evolve, to become more, to build a life that reflects your values, she's left trying to explain to herself why she let go of the one person who never asked her to be anything other than real. And now, she knows, some bridges don't burn, they dissolve. And when they're gone, you realize you were never supposed to cross back over. You've seen what happens when a good man is taken for granted, how your silence becomes her lesson, your growth becomes her loss, and your peace becomes her punishment. But the truth is, most never learn how to rise from that pain, because society doesn't want you strong, clear, and emotionally unshakable. They want you confused, chasing, doubting yourself. That's why the Stoic relationship blueprint was created, for the men ready to step out of that cycle forever. It's not just a book, it's your shield, your reset, your manual for becoming untouchable. Now available in audiobook format, you can carry this power with you, on walks, while training, driving, building the life she never believed you could. If you're ready to reclaim your identity and never waste another second on someone who doesn't see you, comment, "I choose peace." Like this video, subscribe to help more men find these truths, and grab the book now, linked in the comments. It will always be yours. It will change everything. And one day, when she looks back, you'll already be long gone. Too focused, too fulfilled, too free.